I knew the gate was going to be a problem, enough that I considered looking for a place to climb over the fence. But the shoddy construction meant there was a high chance of some pony spotting us. Even if no one made a commotion, I had no way of telling who might be working with the bandits. And, even if they hadn't received word of the raid, drawing attention to ourselves was liable to negate that advantage, and more. No, we needed to keep our heads on straight, and act as naturally as possible. While I was almost certain that one of Blaze's guard buddies would see us and make a big deal out of how long she'd been missing, I still had a feeling that it would be the least conspicuous choice. Unfortunately, I hadn't expected to see Ernest Care coming up the path, and that was only the first of the surprises. He wore plate barding, much like the kind the guard uses, but made of dull gray steel instead of the guard's enchanted gold. A weather-beaten saddlebag and what appeared to be a newly sharpened hatchet swung off his back. But, though this kit did much to shatter my image of the friendly innkeeper stuck behind a desk, what truly surprised me was the ease at which he wore it. He marched forward as though he had carried that gear 100 times. Part of me suspected that he really had. He was barely past the wall when he saw us and froze. My mind tore through scenarios, pitching them out like scraps of parchment, as it scrambled to find a way to downplay the inevitable commotion. Annoyingly enough, the only idea that stuck was, roll with it. Time was up anyway, as both Blaze and Ernest galloped straight up towards each other and embraced. At first, neither said a word, but the fever of their muzzles got the message across just fine. Tears glinted off in the afternoon sun as they trickled out from under Ernest's forelock. Blaze! Dad! Blaze choked. Ernest's face turned stern. Where have you been? We were worried sick. I'm sorry. I found these mercenaries, but they were bad guys, and I was kidnapped, and there was this evil mage. Blaze said all at once, slowed only by bouts of sniffles. Shh! Ernest glanced up and across the gathering onlookers before meeting my gaze. I gave him a quick nod, which was met with him making a nearly imperceptible motion over his shoulder. He let out a sigh, and when he spoke again, the anger that had been venting from his voice left with only caution. Everything will be all right. Let's go inside and talk about this some more. Their movement was plodding. Understandable, but it did little for my nerves, as it made them something of a parade. If the mayor had agents in the crowd at all, there was no avoiding them. While the crowd's expression generally consisted of sympathy, they moved on to a mix of suspicion and confusion when they saw me. I kept my distance, and an eye out for weapons. It was almost like evading the shadows of the bandit base all over again. And, once we were safe within the walls of the inn, the feeling of the relief was no less intense. Ernest continued past the desk and into one of the back rooms. I hesitated in the hall, but my brain kindly reminded me that we needed this help. They'd understand. Trailblazer, you're in so much trouble, young mare. Silver Platter yelled. The sternness in her voice faltered almost immediately. I walked into the room, just in time to catch her hobbling the last half of the distance around the paper cutter desk. I'm sorry, Mom. The three met in the center of the room, embracing, crying, but not saying a word. I shuffled my hooves and took a few steps back, wondering if I should have given them a few moments. I let my gaze drift through the rest of the room, over the mostly bare walls, to the desk. Behind the desk and its endless paper bounty was a trio of binder-stuffed shelves. Between them all, there must have been years' worth of records. In the very least, the accounting was way more meticulous than I had initially given credit for. When my eyes ran out of room to explore, I decided that perhaps it was time for me to wait in the hall. Wait! Ernest called just before I reached the door. When I paused, he trotted over to me. I glanced over my shoulder. Don't you want some time? It's quite clear something very serious is going on. I need to make sure this safety will last. We need some pony from Iron Shoe to match some riding, Blaze blurted out. I sighed. At least she knew how to get to the point. Context be damned. Ernest frowned. What? Why? The mayor's up to something fishy, and we have a letter to prove it. Blaze motioned vigorously between the two of us. Ernest stood stock still for a good 3 seconds. Then he opened his mouth. He spoke very carefully. Blaze, I want you to listen. You have to forget about that letter. Forget about the mayor, and whatever it is you think you know. What? Why? What kind of guard lets this slide? Blaze puffed out her chest. I'm retired. I couldn't believe it'd taken me so long to notice, but now that I was closer to Ernest, I realized his armor wasn't made of steel. That dull gray was a layer of paint, expertly laid. From there, everything began to fall into place. If he was a guard, that paint was meant to mask the armor's enchanted gold. He was an ex-guard with something to hide, and at my first night, and his hesitation returned to me, I was left with only one line of questioning. Why? What did the mayor do? There was only one way for me to find out. Ernest, can we talk in the hall for a moment? About your career. And Timberwolves. I watched Ernest very carefully. He turned to look at me, but did nothing else. To be fair, I had just dropped a bit of a bomb on him. I could only hope the mayor's hold wasn't as strong enough to make him clam up. Hey, no fair. I'm part of this too, Blaze yelled. His face contorted, torn between his daughter and his secrets. Finally, he let out a sigh and spoke. Close the door. I obliged and rejoined the others. Ernest. Silver Platter gave her husband a concerned look. He shook his head and pressed his muzzle against her cheek. It needs to be said. He turned to Blaze, pausing every several seconds. A paranoid part of me wondering if he'd changed his mind, but my fears were quickly put to rest. A long time ago, when I was on patrol, I was ambushed and wounded by Timberwolves. They would have taken my life too, if the Necromancer hadn't stopped in. She took me in and tended to me while I healed. Once I was better, she sent me on my way. Blaze took a step back, like she'd just been slapped. You knew she wasn't a bad mare? Yes. Ernest looked away. Blaze strode forward, pain and indignity in her eyes. Why? Why didn't you say anything? You could have stopped the mayor. You could have cleared Ivory's name. Do you know how many ponies want her dead? I couldn't really blame Blaze, as the same thoughts were occurring in my mind. So, you've met her, he said grimly. She saved your daughter's life from bandits. Twice, I pointed out. Why didn't you say anything? Why are you protecting him? Blaze stomped her hooves and gave him a hard stare. It was a look much like their previous fight, but also different. There wasn't just anger and stubbornness. I saw pain, confusion, betrayal. It's not that simple. I did what was necessary to protect you. Ernest and Silver's gazes drifted to Silver's crippled leg. There was no uncertainty in my mind. They may as well have just come out and said it. I felt my anger slipping away, leaving only dread and sorrow in its wake. He had had no choice, only dilemma. Blaze stared at her mom. Oh, my... Celestia, you knew too? He did it, didn't he? And you just let him do what he wanted you to while you hid, like a bunch of cowards. Blaze. Silver stepped forward and pressed her cheek against Blaze's neck. Don't touch me, Blaze yelled, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clambered away. I can't believe you two. It's like I don't know you anymore." Then, with a speed that I didn't even think she had in her, Blaze bolted for the door, flinging it open and disappearing into the hall. "Blaze, wait!" Ernest reacted next, charging right after her. I was only a split second behind. Though Blaze's head start worked heavily against us, Ernest seemed to already know where she was going. He led me out the back exit and across a small field. From there, the terrain became uneven, with scattered with bushes, anchored, and everywhere they could manage. That was most troubling was the size of the bushes, low and squat. They hardly had the proper profile to hide a grown mare, and with no trees in sight, the bushes could only give way to more field. Despair crept in, as I wondered if we had somehow gone astray. That was when Ernest hopped over a surprisingly steep ridge and stopped. I followed suit, and any questions I had evaporated when I followed his eyes to the slope. Battered, yet stubborn bushes dotted the side, coating the dirt with sun-singed green. And hidden among the densest of the clusters, there was a mouth to a small cave. Rough-cut planks stood guard, barricading all entry. "Blaze!" Ernest called. "Go away!" Blaze's yell was barely audible through her makeshift door. "I don't want to hear any more lies!" I glanced at Ernest. "Would you mind if I gave it a try? She might be more receptive to a third party." He worked his jaw, but quickly decided against whatever he was going to say. With a sigh, he bowed his head. "Go ahead." Trotting up to the barricade, I rapped on it with my hoof. "Blaze, it's me, Dusky. Do you want to talk?" "Is it just you?" I glanced back at Ernest, who took the cue to give us some more space. "Yeah, just me." The planks glowed, clawing against the ground as they pulled back just far enough for me to slip through. No sooner was I inside when it was pushed back into place. A couple small boulders rolled up behind it, reinforcing its position. A single magic lantern sat on a crate in the middle of the cave, its woeful, inadequate light barely able to reveal the central area. The rest of the darkness was threatened only by a token dimness. Several open crates surrounded the lamp, rolled up scrolls, scraps of barding, and the few shoddily constructed weapons poking out over the tops. Even after my eyes had time to adjust, it took me a few moments to find Blaze. Her silhouette was tucked up in the far corner, and best I could tell, she had one of those crooked spears planted into the ground in front of her. "Blaze?" I took a cautious step forward. "How are you feeling?" The spear lifted into the air, and I froze. It swayed, suspended in front of Blaze's muzzle, as though it was there something profound etched into the shaft. "He could have stopped me, Dusky. This was my life. It was supposed to be the thing that would avenge my mom and save the town, and I..." Her voice fell to a whisper. I was lied to. He knew, and he never said a damn word. I trotted the rest of the distance and settled down beside her. Sometimes simply listening is the best option. She tossed the spear away, and it skipped a couple of times across the rocky ground. "All this hate, and I spread it. By Celestia, I brought the militia together, and we said horrible things. How we'd kill her. How we'd be heroes. And now, just knowing how wrong we were, it makes me sick." I, of course, understood her anger. The revelation that she had planned the murder of an innocent would be nothing short of harsh. The feeling could only be compounded by the fact that she had always been one talk away from setting things straight. And yet, I knew there was a missing perspective on the whole ordeal. I understood all too well the penalties for unchecked zeal, the kind that Ernest surely feared. Perhaps it was time I opened up a bit more to Blaze. "Can I tell you a story?" "What?" Blaze turned to look at me. "I promise you, it has a point." Sure, I guess." There was once a young mare who traveled from town to town, aimlessly to see the sights of the world. On one particular journey, she ended up in the big, bustling city. Though she was entranced by its beauty, secretly, she had another motive: to find adventure, just like daring do. Blaze tilted her head. I took a deep breath, forcing the images from my mind as they returned. And the mare found something. Something she wasn't supposed to. Something that a group of bad ponies wanted to remain secret. Deep down, she knew she shouldn't touch it. But she was lost in the excitement, in the thrill of its discovery. So she stepped forward, giving it to the guard and volunteering to be a witness. Then what? She was found out, and they decided to get rid of her. The guard tried its best to protect her, and though it succeeded, it was able to obtain a warrant. The ambush was well coordinated. More than 8 guards died to bring down that one warehouse. And in the end, it was just the tip of the iceberg. All that loss. And for what? Courage and cowardice are not black and white terms. Your dad knows these things come with a cost, and he's just trying to do what he thinks is right. Same as you. A heavy silence fell over the room. I waited till Blaze looked up again. Do you see now why I'm a traveler, and not an adventurer? She nodded. So, what do you say? I stood and offered her a hoof. Shall we talk this out and get the situation taken care of? She stared at my hoof, though her hesitation was short-lived. Okay. The trek back to the office was awkward, silent, and possibly even worse than them fighting. This stretched on after our arrival, and I started to suspect I'd have to play mediator. Thankfully, Blaze took the first step. What happened? What did he do? The mayor, or at least the current one, didn't do much. His father was always doting on him, and I imagine it didn't take much to convince Peaceful State that Ivory was a menace and a threat. The legend, Blaze whispered. Ernest nodded. Among other things, I'm sure. When I went to him with my findings, State would brook no challenge to his image of a perfect son. I sent word to the rest of the guard, but there was never a reply. And then, one night, his gaze drifted over to Silver Platter's leg. When several moments passed, he continued. I was walking home from the market when an unhitched cart came out of nowhere. I could barely get out of the way in time, and when the cart cleared, no pony would take responsibility. No pony at the scene of the accident, anyway, Ernest added. I found an anonymous note on my desk that same day. It demanded that I stop pursuing anything having to do with the Necromancer, or the next cart wouldn't be so off-target. Blaze leaned over and nuzzled up against her mother's neck. In spite of that situation, I couldn't help but smile. So, I did what I had to. Ernest stared at the wall. I kept my head low, and my family safe. Blaze trotted over and stood in front of him. Dad, I know you mean well, but she's helped us so much. Is it really right to leave her hanging like this? With a sigh, Ernest turned his attention back to me. Let me see the letter. I slipped the letter from my flight satchel and watched him carefully, worried that he might have second thoughts. He studied the page several times without any change in expression before returning it to me. Where did you find this? The bandit hideout. I tried to keep my voice level as the worry closed in around my chest. The what? Ernest and Silver exclaimed. The bandit hideout, Blaze answered, a slight waver in each of her words. The bandits, they they took me away, and Dusk and Ivory rescued me. Ernest bowed his head, letting out a long exhalation. I felt like the air was gathering around me, pressing in against my worry, leaving me breathless. This was it. The answer to the big question. Did Blaze's speech compel him to act, or scare him away? When he finally looked up and opened his mouth, I felt like I was going to burst. If you can get me a sample of his writing, I might have something, or someone, who can take a look at it. Then all the weight was gone, whisked away like air escaping a balloon. Great! Let's get that poster! Blaze perked up. No, Blaze. You're staying here. He turned to me. I'm sorry. This is as much as I can give. If he holds this much power, we can't risk acting openly against him. Perhaps I counted my chickens too soon. Well, it's better than nothing. I bit my lip and nodded. I understand. I'll get the poster. But, Blaze frowned. It's okay, Blaze. The risk really is too great for you. At least, if it's just me and something goes sour, I can just leave town. I knew my words could hardly be considered comforting, but if I could absolve even a little of her guilt, it was worth it. Blaze slumped, wearing a grimace like she was sitting on a pincushion, but made no further protests. I turned to the door and took a deep breath. With luck, the mayor would still be in the dark.